Welcome to POTUS 2017, where we keep watch on the Oval Office and pour cold hard facts on the overheated political rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. Today, legal immigration under the knife. If passed, a Senate bill would cut the number of green cards in half, largely by excluding certain family members. And later, in our evidence-based politics segment, a scholar shows us the ripple effect on other countries of our deportations. First, this.
Protecting our workers also means reforming our system of legal immigration. The current outdated system depresses wages for our poorest workers and puts great pressure on taxpayers. Nations around the world, like Canada, Australia, and many others, have a merit-based immigration system. It's a basic principle that those seeking to enter a country ought to be able to support themselves financially.
Restricting legal immigration is more than rhetoric. Hoping to cut the flow in half, GOP Senators Tom Cotton of Arkansas and co-sponsor David Perdue of Georgia have introduced legislation that would close off several avenues that legal immigrants use to bring in family. Here's Cotton on the Hoover Institution's program, Uncommon Knowledge.
My legislation would continue to grant preferences for spouses and for unmarried minor children. But as you say, brothers, sisters, adult children, and their spouses, parents would no longer be granted a preference in our system. And the heart of the matter is that would get you from about 1 million green cards a year down to about 500,000 green cards a year without doing anything to touch reunification of immediate families, which I think most Americans support.
Whether this bill, called the RAISE Act, becomes law or not, it opens a discussion. Would less legal immigration actually give more Americans a job and a raise? And why now? Finally coming to our senses or rising xenophobia? Two guests will address these matters, and we begin with Dr. Stephen Camarota, Director of Research at the Conservative Center for Immigration Studies. He joins us via Skype from Washington. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Well, thanks for having me.
Senator Cotton said in that clip that only immediate family members should be allowed in under family provisions. But isn't the law only for immediate family members now? Isn't it mostly siblings, brothers and sisters who he wants to cut down on?
Well, yeah, it depends on how you define immediate family, right? So right now, you can, if you're a U.S. citizen, you could sponsor a brother or sister plus whatever spouse they have plus whatever children they have. It'd be the same, say, you could sponsor your children if they live overseas, plus their spouse, plus any children that they have. So what he's talking about when he says immediate family is the spouses and minor children of U.S. citizens could continue to come unrestricted and have the preference, but those other categories would go away.
The Trump campaign was so much about illegal immigration and said he's for legal immigration. Now he's elected, and boom, we're talking about cutting legal immigration in half. Immigrant groups are suspicious that folks like your organization, Senator Cotton, President Trump, just don't want these people here. Why go on to make legal immigration a thing at all?
Yeah, I mean, every speech he mentioned legal immigration, especially the big one in Arizona. So he did talk about legal immigration. I mean, the argument for it is several things. One is right now our legal immigration system produces a lot of immigrants, or a lot of immigrants come who don't have a lot of education. As a result, a lot of them struggle. Now, it depends on how you view that, but government data suggests that more than half of all legal immigrants access the welfare system. More than half actually legal immigrants need, who have children, need food assistance, say food stamps or free school lunch and the WIC program. So right now we have a system that allows in a lot of folks who are so poor that they can't even feed their own children.
And
now,
is that at a different rate than people who are born here?
Yeah, immigrant welfare use tends to be higher when you compare them to natives. What is true of immigrants is that the least educated immigrants use welfare at about the same rate as the least educated natives, but there are just so many more unskilled immigrants that the overall rate for immigrants is much higher than natives. And of course, if they used it at the same rate, that would still be hard to justify, since the idea behind immigration is mostly that it's supposed to benefit us, so that they should have very low rates if that's going to be the criteria or the main incentive to do it.
But
now,
if,
you could argue that immigration has nothing to do with what benefits American taxpayers or workers, and it's really about giving people in other countries an opportunity, a chance for a better life.
Or-
In that case, well, I was going to say, in that case, bringing in unskilled folks would make a lot of sense, because they are definitely going to do better here. But if the goal is to benefit the United States, then it's much harder to justify our current system.
Let me ask some pushback questions on that in a couple of ways. Assuming that it is to benefit people here, and one could have a whole other discussion about what the balance should be. It's not maybe necessarily just one or the other, considering our country's heritage. But if the only stats that you're citing are ones regarding welfare use and other things that cost the taxpayers, and you're not citing job creation, then how do we know what the ultimate economic cost or benefit is? For example, Steve Jobs' father was an immigrant from Syria. And so where are all those business startups and job creation stats to go along?
Yeah, of course, his father abandoned him, and he was raised by an adoptive family. But the point here is that, yeah, you might argue that maybe immigrants are uniquely entrepreneurial. When we look at the government data, it looks like about 12 or 13% of both immigrants and natives run their own business. So it doesn't look like a particularly standout thing among immigrants, but entrepreneurship certainly isn't lacking. However, the statistics do show that the most educated immigrants are very entrepreneurial. So again, if you wanted to really enhance that, you would want to be much more selective than our current system, which lets people in mostly because of the family relationships. So right now, immigrants are not a particular source of entrepreneurship, but it's not lacking. But you could change that if you move to a more skills-based system.
Let me play a clip of Senator Perdue of Georgia, who is the co-sponsor with Senator Cotton. He acknowledges here that, like all countries, we need a good worker-to-retiree ratio to fund Social Security and Medicare, and we're not doing it with our own birth rate. Watch.
Our birth rate in America is below average of the last 50 years. And this is an economic issue as well. There are two ways you grow the economy, GDP. One is population growth. Two is productivity growth. But when 1 out of every 16 legal immigrants coming to the country are merit-based EB candidates, that's a problem.
So why isn't that overall an argument for just a lot of immigration, assuming people are going to find jobs and become workers at a pretty high rate in our country? You know the problems that Japan and maybe Italy and some other countries with not that much immigration and a low birth rate are having, supporting their senior populations.
Right, but again, in that case, you would want to be very selective. You don't want to bring in lots of folks who have very little education, because all the research indicates that in no way do they pay enough in taxes to cover their consumption of public services. So if you're hoping to use immigration to help pay for government, for example, you want a very selective system where making the immigrants relatively high income. Whereas if you allow in lots of immigrants who don't have a lot of education, you will actually make your entitlement crisis worse. That's why the welfare use rates right now are so disconcerting. Overall, here's some basic statistics. The total fertility rate in the United States for American women is about 1.75. It's a little higher for the immigrants, but when you average them in, it raises it to about 1.83. So immigration raises fertility in America, but only about 4%. So it's a small effect. One of the interesting things, as an aside, that's been happening in the last decade and a half is that immigrant fertility has fallen dramatically. So the hoped for benefit of rejuvenating our aging society is not really there. Demographers have known this for a long time. Immigration can make your society slightly younger, but not much. And if you're selecting a lot of unskilled immigrants, it won't be helpful with your entitlement problem.
We just have under a minute left. Steve Bannon, in his speech at the Conservative Political Action Conference, stated the two pillars of the Trump administration's nationalist agenda: economic nationalism to benefit American citizens and cultural nationalism. Is cutting legal immigration in half for both of those goals?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some people like Bannon, and I think legitimately are concerned about job competition at the bottom end of the labor market. It's hard to make the case that we don't have enough unskilled people already here. On the question of assimilation, right now we have about 34 million legal immigrants, and I think you can reasonably argue that reducing that number from 1 million new folks coming in each year to 500,000 would be helpful in integrating and incorporating immigrants and assimilating them.
Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Sure, thanks for having me.
With a different view, and to put U.S. immigration policy into further historical perspective, joining us now, Nancy Foner, Distinguished Professor of Sociology at the City University of New York. Her most recent book, co-authored with Richard Alba, is Strangers No More, Immigration and the Challenges of Integration in North America and Western Europe. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let's pick up right where we left off with Mr. Camarota, and since your book is about integration, he is obviously concerned that our current rate of legal immigration is too much for the amount of assimilation or integration to take place that we really need to continue to have a unified country. You can disagree with that, I presume.
I definitely disagree with that, because in addition to the book that I wrote, I was on a panel, the National Academy of Sciences panel, on the integration of immigrants into American society. And resoundingly, our answer is that immigrants and their children are integrating into American society. And we looked at a wide range of measures. First of all, immigrants are working at high rates. There's high rates of employment for immigrant men. People are very worried about language. You know, English is dying because of immigrants. Well, immigrants, of course, come from another country, often as adults. They begin to learn English. They feel more comfortable in their home country language. Their children speak English, although they may speak the home country language. By the third generation, overwhelmingly, including Spanish, children of Spanish speakers are monolingual English. So in terms of education, we see that the children of immigrants are making educational progress, improving certainly over their parents. And of course, their parents come here to strive to do well and for their children to do well. One of the things that, for example, President Trump talks about all the time is immigrant criminals, you know, that we're letting in all these criminals. Immigrants have lower crime rates, not undocumented infractions, but they have lower crime rates than native-born.
The Harvard economist George Borjas argues on the assimilation or integration question. New immigrants, he writes in the Times, New York Times, who find a large and welcoming community of their countrymen have less need to acquire those skills. They already have a large audience that values whatever they brought with them. Put bluntly, mass migration discourages assimilation. To a lot of people, it will make common sense that if you're immigrating into a community of people who are like you, and if that means doesn't speak English or aren't familiar with the Constitution or whatever it is, you're not going to have that need to assimilate in order to survive.
Well, immigrants come as adults. If they've spent they come in the 20s and the 30s, you can't expect them to completely change and become fully American, after that. So it's amazing, actually, the extent of integration that we find among immigrants, that they begin to learn English. By the way, many immigrants are very patriotic about American society. They want to improve, and they come here to work hard, to send money home, but above all, for their children to do better. And what we really see, if you're looking at integration and assimilation, you're not really looking just at the immigrant generation. You're looking at their children. And their children are growing up as Americans. Just as in past generations, this happened as well. And so I think that, we do see this process continuing.
Talk about past generations at different times of immigration bubbles. And I think you would say we're at an immigration bubble in terms of the ebbs and flows over American history. Have we seen the kind of language that we're hearing from President Trump and Senator Tom Cotton before?
Unfortunately, yes. And this is not the first time that America has had nativist reactions to immigration movements. I mean, you can go back to the 1800s. The Chinese immigrants were initially welcomed to build the railway. And then in 1882, there was a Chinese Exclusion Act that basically excluded them and lasted until the 1940s. They were also aliens ineligible for citizenship. Following that, millions of Eastern and Southern European immigrants and Central European immigrants came to this country in the 1920s. Restrictive immigration laws put in place, national origins quotas established to cut off immigration from those parts of the world. You know, we've had this before.
So why do we have these political ebbs and flows? If immigration so benefits the country at very high rates, as you would argue, why does a backlash develop, you know, at the height of Ellis Island, and that was shut down in the 1920s, and now, after 50 years of the current immigration laws?
I guess there's fears about people who are different, racial fears. I mean, if you look back in the early 20th century, I think many Americans would be surprised at the racism, basically, against Italians and Jews. Italians were thought to be swarthy. Jews and Italians were thought that they would never integrate, that their children would never integrate, that they were polluting America and ruining America's racial stock. So a lot of it is racial fears, and we see that today. I mean, we see it explicitly at the White House in wanting a Christian white America. And so, you know, with Bannon, I mean, that's his argument. And so I think there are fears. There are economic fears, although the evidence shows that immigrants are not having a significant negative effect on native workers in terms of wages or even jobs.
And conceptually or philosophically, for you, who is immigration for? Mr. Camarota raised that. Who do you see it
I think
as
it benefits
for?
both.
And is it different in this? Should it be different in this country than elsewhere?
I think it benefits both. I think that obviously it benefits the lives of immigrants because they're coming here to do better. They can't do as well in their home countries. But it has a tremendous benefit
But
for
that's
the
the
United
benefits
States.
argument.
Yes.
Who should it be for?
Well,
What should the criteria be?
Well, ultimately, I guess that's a complicated issue, right, in terms of it should be for the benefit of the country, obviously, who's letting immigrants come in. But immigrants are a benefit for the United States. I mean, they enrich the economy, they enrich our culture, they bring hardworking people. I mean, this notion that low-skilled immigrants are kind of just going to go on welfare. The immigrants are hardworking. First of all, they're not even eligible for most of these provisions for 5 years. But they are hardworking. They're bringing entrepreneurs. They may not set up a business, but they're hardworking. They're willing to do jobs that Native Americans won't do. And not just because of the wages, but they're unpleasant jobs, they're often dangerous, they don't have a career ladder. Immigrants are willing to do those jobs. They keep America running and they enrich our culture.
Thank you very much for joining us. Whether immigrants are here legally or not, millions feel the chill nowadays, less welcome, unwelcome, even under siege. In the Bronx, New York, as in so many other places, immigration lawyers and counselors hear it every day.
I mean, it feels like everything has changed. There's so much fear in our immigrant communities. It's just incredibly palpable. They're afraid to go to work. They're afraid to go to school.
People who have green cards are afraid of traveling, and people who don't have anything are very afraid of going outside to do their daily basis activities because they don't want to run into the police.
One of the biggest things I'm seeing are clients calling me terrified about how they can prepare to care for their kids, usually U.S. citizen kids, after they're picked up.
What I've noticed since the new administration, I've been getting a lot more clients who have difficulties in their case. For example, if they've been previously arrested, if they have orders of deportation, they would like to clarify things before anything gets worse.
There are rumors that spread incredibly fast, and it's hard to actually figure out what's true or not, that, you know, ICE is picking up folks at the courthouse, ICE is picking up folks at the train station. We try to verify them, but it's hard to.
I guess they're nervous about the unknown. I think they want to either become U.S. citizens as fast as possible, or even just become documented if they can.
High anxiety in the Bronx, New York. Up next, the ripple effect of deportation on other nations when we bring in some additional evidence. for evidence-based politics, where we pour cold, hard facts on the overheated political rhetoric. The threat of deportation that the estimated 11 million undocumented people in the U.S. face has become more poignant in the last few weeks. The Trump administration, trying to carry through on its promise to get tough on illegal immigration, followed the first version of the travel ban with new harsh directives on the domestic front. While Homeland Security policy still prioritizes the deportation of those with criminal convictions, the definition of crime has become more vague. Press Secretary Sean Spicer said immigration enforcement agents have felt the shackles taken off them. The White House also wants to expand the number of enforcement officers, speed up deportation procedures, and empower local police to take part in the process. So here we are. There have already been reports of immigration agents showing up at courthouses, airports, and elsewhere. But what happens to a person forced to return to his or her country? What are the practical realities of deportation? How does it affect communities as well as individuals? Joining us, Cecilia Menjívar. She is co-director of the University of Kansas Center for Migration Research and co-author of Deportation and Return in a Border-Restricted World. Among her recent papers is Transformative Effects of Immigration Law, published in the American Journal of Sociology. She joins us on Skype from Lawrence, Kansas. Professor, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian, for having me on.
Take us behind the curtain into that world. What happens if there is a typical profile or pattern to a person who is deported from the United States to Mexico? Let's use Mexico as an example.
There is a pattern, and I'm calling that in my own work the ripple effects of deportation, because for each deportee, there are effects on the family and on different members of the family, on the communities, and on the institutions of the places they are deported to, as well as on the broader national society and economy of the countries where they are deported to.
Are these ripple effects generally good or bad? Maybe it's good to have that loved one back in town.
Well, it's one thing to have people return for a visit, and that is always a positive thing in migrant-sending communities. But it's a very different story when people are forced to return and or are deported directly. And that has a disruptive effect on the families that receive them, the non-migrant families that receive them, the communities, and also the institutions that have to make adjustments to receive the returnees. And as well as the economies of those, especially the smaller countries, not Mexico necessarily, although it counts in some ways, but I'm thinking of the smaller economies of the 3 Central American countries that receive the most deportees. And economies that have already been weakened by events in the past.
Is that Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador?
Exactly. So I'm thinking of those effects. And so under the circumstances of a forced return or a deportation, the consequences at each of the levels that I'm conceptualizing are not positive for most of the individuals involved at different levels.
Is there law enforcement involvement in the cases that have been emphasized under the Obama administration, which is deporting people who've committed violent crimes, and that the Trump administration says it's going to emphasize too?
The definition of a crime, or a deportable crime, under the Obama administration, and in previous to that, under the Bush and the Clinton administrations, had already been expanded to include people who cross the border without documents, for instance. That became a felony and a deportable offense. And so the deportable crimes were already expanded to include people who who did not engage in crimes that harmed other people directly. And so that already has been the basis for the significant increases in deportations that we saw during the Obama administration.
Yes. So
And
the
now,
ripple effect that you're talking about, is it mostly because these deportees tend to go home and become dependents?
well, there are different effects there because the deportee who goes home is not only dependent on the others, but very crucially, the person who's deported cannot contribute remittances anymore. Remittances that the family was using to support themselves, to avoid hunger and extreme poverty, to send children to school. So without the remittances, the family suffers dire consequences. Institutions in the now receiving communities where the deportees go have to make adjustments and have to also respond to the presence of the deportee.
And so what's the pattern of return? Because one of the reasons for the proposal for a wall is that there's apparently some significant rate of return for people after they've been deported to come back into the United States.
Right, yes. So people who have been deported, we just finished a paper based on the case of Honduras, for instance. We found that 8 out of 10 deportees were already planning a return to the United States. They know what they risk. They know that they risk their lives during the journey itself, and they risk not only deportation, but they also risk detention and possibly prison time. But because the countries they go to don't have viable opportunities for employment or to earn a living to support their families, they see no other option but to re-migrate and to come back in knowing the risks that they will take.
Professor, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your research.
Thank you very much for having me.
And that's POTUS 2017 for today. We're here each week at this hour, keeping watch on the Oval Office and pouring cold, hard facts on the overheated political rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.